Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a jam-packed program for you today. Our San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera and our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz are going to be joining me in just a few moments to go over a variety of subjects related to the border. But as always, we're going to go ahead and take a look at what's trending across the border to start the program, starting with the Trump administration's crackdown that swept through Charlotte, North Carolina this weekend. The mayor of the Democratic-led city of nearly 1 million people says the effort is, quote, striking fear in his city and not making it safer. Masked agents in military gear driving unmarked cars arrived in Charlotte on Saturday. Reporter Savannah Rudisell has the latest.
Customs and Border Patrol agents made more than 130 arrests in Charlotte over the weekend. That's according to the agent that's leading the deportation efforts, Greg Bovino. He said on social media that they made more than half of those arrests on Saturday in a span of 5 hours. This video shows just after noon on Sunday, about a dozen or so agents at a grocery store in Northeast Charlotte. Homeland Security agents said in a statement to Queen City News they're, quote, surging law enforcement to cities like Charlotte so people can, quote, live without fear of violent, criminal, illegal aliens hurting them. Local activists say masked agents making arrests are only inciting more fear in the community. Several protests popped up around the Charlotte area, including a march through Uptown on Saturday. Organizers say that they're planning more demonstrations to make sure their voices are heard.
Well, Border Patrol can expect to see the same fight back movement that was waged in Chicago, that was waged in LA, and we are going to bring that same energy here in Charlotte.
It's not clear how long agents may stay in the Queen City. Federal sources say they plan to move to New Orleans next. Reporting in Charlotte, I'm Savannah Rudisell.
Now, activists plan to protest Border Patrol's arrest in Charlotte today ahead of tonight's Charlotte City Council meeting. Also happening on the border, as we said, each of the immigration crackdowns has been given a peculiar name. The influx of agents in Charlotte has been dubbed Charlotte's Web. The man heading the operation is Border Patrol Chief Gregory Bovino. You'll remember he was in charge of similar operations in Los Angeles this past summer and was in Chicago over the last few months leading Operation Midway. Last night, Bovino released his own montage of the apprehensions his agents conducted over the weekend, which you can see on your screen now. He said many of those detained had, quote, significant criminal and immigration history. Moving on, the Supreme Court has agreed to review a policy under previous administrations to deny migrants a chance to apply for asylum on the Mexican border until space opened up to the process claims. The justices said today they will hear the Trump administration's appeal of the lower court's rulings that struck down the practice known as metering. That's when U.S. border agents capped the number of people seeking asylum at border crossings by prohibiting migrants from ever setting foot in the United States. The administration pressed for the high court's intervention even after President Donald Trump suspended the asylum system in January. This case will be argued early next year. And I want to bring in our correspondents, Julian Resendiz from El Paso and Salvador Rivera in San Diego to discuss this a little further. Julian, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yes, really, definitely. This is a hot-button issue among immigrant advocates here on the border because ever since the practice of asylum, requesting asylum coming into ports of entry was stopped, we have seen a very demoralizing phenomenon for those who fled their country looking for protection in the U.S., and that is that without this avenue, they are struggling to remain on the border for any length of time. They don't feel that their application is they're gonna have a chance to file an application, and if they get that chance, that it's not going anywhere. So as a result, what we are seeing for the past few months here on the border, especially south of El Paso, Texas, is that migrants have stopped coming. There are still hundreds of thousands of people in Central America, for instance, also in some pockets of Mexico where drug traffickers seem to be the ones in charge, which are suffering crime and may or may not have legitimate asylum claims as far as being persecuted, as far as their lives being in danger, but they are not coming to the border anymore because they don't feel that they have a chance. In an illustration of this, Rudy, we have some images, I believe, of what the migrant shelters in Juarez have looked like for the past several months. There we see one close to the mountains where people usually coming from the interior, and you see empty dining rooms, empty living rooms. There's hardly more than a handful of families still holding out, and some of those families have left. Here we have another migrant shelter in the Anapra area, which is right next to the U.S. border, west of El Paso, Texas, west in West Juarez, and you see nobody there. The day I was there, I saw maybe 3 or 4 people there, and they were thinking about leaving. We have been told in recent weeks that some of the families that have been there ever since Biden was still president, they were waiting for appointments. They prefer to leave to other countries and ask for asylum there. Spain is one very popular country, and also Canada. That's where their applications are going now. So definitely, whatever the U.S. does as far as preventing people from applying asylum on the border is having an effect of discouraging this type of arrivals. Like I said, even though despite them having perhaps a legitimate claim or not.
In Salvador, how are things looking over in your area of the border?
Rudy, pretty similar to what's going on in El Paso, the Juarez area here in Tijuana, San Diego. Also, very few immigrants coming here, migrants seeking asylum, because it's actually virtually impossible, as Julian was saying. And we have to go back to earlier year, prior to June of last year, when we were, or some people were calling it an invasion, when tens of thousands of migrants were showing up at the border, waiting for Border Patrol agents to arrest them. They were taking advantage of the asylum laws, the way they were written under the Nixon administration in the early 70s. And that law said pretty clearly, if you come to the U.S. to a port of entry, or even if you're caught between ports of entry, you can ask for asylum. And by law, they would have to let you stay in the country as your legal case went through the court system. And that's what a lot of people were doing. They were taking advantage of it, and the courts got overrun. They just could not issue enough appointments. And that's when the crackdown began in June, when President Biden finally realized that this is getting out of hand and possibly could cost him the election, something that did. But again, this is why we had so many people coming to the U.S. They were seeking asylum, going through the court cases, and granted, about 2/3 of those cases were being rejected for lack of evidence. Now, fast forward to the Trump administration, it pretty much ended asylum. And now they're trying to get the Supreme Court to let them go on with this turn back policy, the metering. So right now, what happens at ports of entry here in San Isidro, for example, when you drive up, before you actually get to the inspection areas or you walk into the terminal, the pedestrian terminal, you have to show proof that you have documents that allow you to proceed into the U.S. If you don't have them, they will turn you back, and hence this name, the turn back policy. And this is what a lot of groups are fighting. They want the asylum laws to be followed, and they're hoping that the U.S. Supreme Court does not strike it down, does not turn back what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said, that this was illegal. But now that the Supreme Court has ruled that it will listen to the Trump administration's arguments, this could be a reversal of what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just said earlier.
And what's interesting about this is that so often over the last couple years, we've been hearing if you want to claim asylum, you need to go to a port of entry in an effort to get folks to stop crossing in between ports of entry. But what's interesting about this is that it gets to a point, it's almost like moving the goalposts a little bit, is it not? When you say, hey, you're not even welcome here to even get a chance to do that.
That is exactly what's happening. If you don't have the documents, you can't even get to talk to a U.S. CBP officer to claim or ask for asylum. So as you said, they're moving the post, and they're certainly flirting with the rules, and they're getting away with it because you can't drive, or you can't walk up to a customs official or CBP officer and ask for asylum as it stands right now.
Yeah, very interesting stuff.
Rudy,
oh, yes, Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, Rudy, what I was going to say is that one of the complaints I heard before Trump took over was that maybe some people were abusing the asylum system because they were economic migrants. The asylum law clearly says that you have to be persecuted, whether it's for your expressing a political opinion and then being targeted by a government, or being in a special class of people. However, like Saul pointed out, if it's in the law that they must listen to you, they must give you the opportunity to file a claim, then that's where this legal point of contention is all coming from. It doesn't matter what the outcome will be. This is what the law says. And further, I wanted to talk about the metering. What metering was referring to is how many people and how do we allow them to come in. Otherwise, it'd be an open border. Everybody could come in at any time. So metering was kind of a system to select who comes in on any particular day. Now, what the advocates say is wrong with that is that those who don't get in that particular day are forced to stay back in Mexico. And let me tell you, I am still reporting, even though there's very few people coming to the border, I am still reporting stories of migrants being kidnapped, of migrants being targeted because somebody sees or thinks that they're not from Mexico, so they target them in Mexico. So that's also one of the pitfalls of the current stoppage of asylum applications that we're seeing here.
And another interesting point that you brought up, Julian, was the economic aspect, rather, of these asylum seekers seeking, a better life economically for themselves in the United States. But one of the things that we often hear from different, individuals that may be against so many asylum seekers and granting asylum to those individuals is, if you're coming from another country and you get to a country where you're no longer being prosecuted, then technically you're no longer in any kind of danger and you should stay in that country. Do either of you, have you heard of cases like this in the past in your areas?
Rudy, I actually did a story a couple of weeks ago about how hard it is to get asylum in Mexico. So a lot of people that are going through Mexico to get to the U.S., in theory, like you said, have to ask for asylum in that country. But in Mexico, it's been hard to grant asylum to a lot of people who actually do desire. People from Haiti, Jamaica, and other countries are saying, we would like to stay in Mexico, provided we can, in fact, get asylum. But it's apparently also very hard to get asylum in Mexico. And one of the reasons or excuses given by the government is that a lot of these people don't carry their lawful documents. We don't really know who these people are. We don't really know where they came from. So this is being used as an excuse to perhaps not provide asylum to all these people who are in fact seeking it. And according to a group in Tijuana, we're talking about tens of thousands of people who have submitted for asylum. And a typical case to go through the courts from beginning to end in Mexico is taking about 2 years. So this is a lengthy process for folks to seek asylum, have to stay in Mexico, hopefully that they will not be victims of crime or violence, and then hopefully do get the go-ahead, they do receive asylum. In the meantime, there's a lot of industries that are trying to get these migrants to work for them. So there's a lot of employment opportunities, but those are also hard to come by. You have to get a permit. You have to get permission from the government to actually be able to work in Mexico. So the asylum process in Mexico, especially, is lengthy and not as easy as it might seem.
Yeah, and another thing
it's a complicated.
Go ahead, Julian.
It's a complicated topic, and what I have seen is that Mexico has issued a record number of humanitarian permits. But what I'm seeing on the border is that those permits, like Sal said, don't lead to either resident through final refugee decisions. So we have a lot of people all over the migrant route, southern Mexico, Mexico City, northern Mexico, who are just kind of in a limbo, in a legal limbo, and that prevents them from getting formal jobs. Those few migrants from other countries that I do see are working in what they call the informal economy. That is, being street vendors, working at the city market, perhaps being on the street selling stuff. So it is kind of a double standard, and that's part of the conversation. One of the things that needs to be figured out, not just by the U.S., but also by countries on the way to the U.S., such as Mexico. So it is a very complicated topic here.
Yeah, and I think another important thing to add is something that you've actually reported on, Julian, is the dangers, as Sal mentioned, the dangers that these migrants that are kind of waiting to see if they're going to be able to stay in Mexico or not. Some of them even fall as deep as into drug addiction and drug dependence as well. You know, a lot of dangers out there for those folks just to maybe even not even find out, or maybe find out that they're not even going to be able to stay for very long. So, as you said, a very, very complicated issue. All right, well, we're going to take a very quick break. And when we come back, Border Report Live will be back rather in 1 minute. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles here in Harlingen, Texas. Moving on to the next subject, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum spoke out against violence that broke out during a protest in the capital over crime, corruption, and impunity. On Saturday, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of Mexico City in a protest organized by members of Generation Z, but which ended with strong backing from older supporters of opposition parties. In the lead up to the protest, Sheinbaum accused right-wing parties of trying to infiltrate the Gen Z movement and of using bots on social media to try to increase attendance. The demonstration was mostly peaceful, but as you can see, ended with some young people clashing with the police. Protesters attacked police with stones, fireworks, sticks, chains, grabbing police shields and other equipment. Speaking on Saturday, Sheinbaum said, quote, "Violence should never be used to bring about change, always through peaceful means," end quote. The Capitol Security Secretary said 120 people were injured, 100 of them were police officers, 20 people were arrested. And I wanted to bring back in Salvador Rivera and Julian Resendiz to discuss this topic a little bit more in detail. Salvador?
Well, not that I'm defending any violent acts or what the protesters might have done, but there were instances of soldiers and police officers going after the demonstrators and literally beating them up, hurting them, sending them to the hospital. So there was violence. There was attacks on both sides. And as you can see, they're bringing down a barrier. The government, President Sheinbaum, erected a fence all the way around the offices for the federal government in Mexico at the Zócalo, the main square in Mexico City. So in a way, they were fencing off the people from their government. And that did not sit right with a lot of folks in Mexico. And that is also contributing to some of the question marks. Now that a lot of people are going after Sheinbaum, calling her the narco president. Obviously, she is fighting back against that statement. She's saying she's totally for the people and totally against narco traffickers, the drug lords. But obviously, these people don't believe that. They're seeking change. As Julian did say, there was a huge call on social media to get younger folks, the Generation X or Z, sorry, to go out there and protest and demand some change. But it would just led to a lot of violent confrontation. But whether it led to change, that remains to be seen.
Julian?
Really, what I can tell you is that, the president did question the legitimacy of this protest. She obviously said, this is being staged by my opponents. But what's relevant here is that we are beginning to see the first signs of organized opposition to an otherwise extremely popular president. Claudia Sheinbaum's favorable ratings are up in the close to the 80% range. And like a political science professor said last week, sometimes there's a disconnect. There's this personality cult toward the character, toward Ms. Sheinbaum. And there's also a lot of complaints about the economy, about crime especially, which is one of the reasons, one of the things that detonated this protest. We have we're fresh off less than a couple of weeks from the high-profile murder of a very popular mayor in the state of Michoacan, who was just up and killed by cartel members, alleged cartel members, while he was being guarded by approximately 200 members of the National Guard who were disseminated throughout the city of Uruapan and neighboring communities. So we're seeing the beginning, perhaps, of a movement to protest, to say not all is good. You may be a nice person, but there's some issues that you need to solve. So this could be the first of many, hopefully not violent, but many acts of opposition in Mexico.
Now, a question for both of you, and have you all ever seen anything like this before, where the folks in Mexico kind of say, we've had enough of this and we want to change? We hear about these things from France quite often, for example. If there's one thing the people in Paris know how to do, it is protest when they dislike something. But, as someone who's, on this side of the border, I typically don't remember hearing stories about the people rising up in Mexico.
Well, there were parallel demonstrations throughout Mexico, including in Tijuana. They did not get out of hand like it did in Mexico City. But for the most part, they demonstrate again, asking for higher wages, or because they're protesting higher prices, tortillas or other products, other staples in the Mexican economy. But directly protesting, demanding change in government, perhaps I have not seen it to this extent. I mean, obviously it's happened in Mexico. We've had 2 revolutions in Mexico, but maybe this could be the beginning of the end, at least for the Morena party, the controlling party in Mexico. I don't think it'll lead to an overthrow of the government, but perhaps this will lead to more people questioning who their government is and what they're doing to folks who they were supposed to be protecting and working for. I don't know if Julian has a different take. Well, I'm sure he has seen a lot more than I have, because he has been on the border a lot more years than I have, or working the border for that matter.
Salvador, I have seen a lifetime of violent demonstrations against the Mexican government. They usually are very small and in specific communities. Here in Juarez, for instance, across the border from El Paso, back in the 90s, I covered plenty of protests having to do with union organizers, which were dissolved by police. I also saw protests by a group, at the time it was called, I believe, the CDP. They were socialist, and they pretty much were taking over neighborhoods. And I also saw a few clashes there. However, as far as organized opposition, that you can say these protests are going to lead to a change of government in Mexico, I have not seen that, because in the past, at least through the 1990s, whenever opposition was mounting, what the ruling party at the time, the PRI, did was to co-opt, to absorb those protests, to somehow make them part of the system, and that's how it was done away with. That ended in the mid-1990s with the rise of the conservative opposition, which is still alive, and which Sheinbaum blames for this protest of the past few days. And they are still out there, and they're highly educated people. They resist them on principle, not necessarily on political and financial gain. So we are probably going to continue to see this type of manifestations for the foreseeable future, especially because Mexico has had a very difficult year economically, as far as security. President Sheinbaum the other day showed a graphic saying, "Oh, look, murders are down substantially." What that graphic coincides with the expulsion or extradition of 29 drug lords from Mexico, which the Mexican government itself said they're still running things from their prisons. We can handle them. We're going to send them to the U.S. for national security. So it's, again, a very complicated, a very nuanced set of problems that Mexico has, and we'll see what happens in the next year, which also might be a challenging one for Mexico from an economic and public safety standpoint.
All right, thank you.
Rudy, if I may add something
go
real
ahead.
quick. It's something that we were mentioning. Julian and I were talking about this before we started. This Generation X, they don't know a Mexico without violence. They don't know a Mexico without all these drug lords flooding their streets, sending stuff to the U.S. and abroad. So perhaps this is an awakening of a generation, the younger people in Mexico, who perhaps are getting wise to what's been going on in their country, and maybe they simply want a better tomorrow. And so oftentimes young people are the foundation for changes in countries. We saw it in the Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe. We've seen it with the Spring Uprising in Egypt and other Middle Eastern countries. So maybe this could be the beginning of something that we are going to keep seeing in the months ahead, perhaps years ahead, until there's some changes in Mexico. And Mexico, hopefully one day, is not as violent as it is. And one day, perhaps, is not the place where most of the drugs that are sent overseas or across the world come from.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for your analysis today and your coverage of these topics. We appreciate you all being here as always. But stay with us. We got just a little bit of under a minute left when we come back. Welcome back to Border Report Live. It was a conversation so good that I lost track of time today. And if you missed it, don't forget that you can get Border Report Live in audio form. You can get us on Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, and YouTube as well. For Salvador in San Diego, Julian in El Paso, my name is Rudy Mireles here in Harlingen. We'll see you all tomorrow.